Hi, this is part 2 of Evelyn Bedwell's testimony. She was still a witness in the 1950s after kind of hanging around the periphery of the organization since the World War II period. She just talked about being unhappy in the previous segment, being unhappy, and she couldn't figure out why she was unhappy. She should be happy, being part of God's organization, and how she mistreated her own son, put so much pressure on him that he had a nervous breakdown at age 15. She continues, on May 30th, about 7 years ago, a friend and I were out in the magazine work. She called on Pastor Dell, the pastor of Rosemont Grace Brethren Church, where we are now members. I stopped by later to see what had detained her. I could say that it was coincidence, but I believe that it was by the hand of God that Ted Dencher, a former witness, was there. He had been speaking at the church. He sent my friend one of his books, and she and her husband read it, but she felt that she shouldn't keep it. It came into my possession through my son. I knew enough about the organization by this time that I believed Mr. Dencher's testimony, but I felt that he could change his doctrines only out of bitterness or revenge. I wasn't very impressed, but it planted a seed of doubt to find out that an active witness had become free. Things had already started to happen in our witness congregation. My husband had been one of the servants. They were called servants in the 50s and 60s, and elders later, of course. My husband had been one of the servants for many years. During this time, there had been occasional disagreements. We were still spiritually sensitive enough to see that things were wrong and that unscriptural things were practiced and condoned. My husband tried to stand up for what was right to help others. We discounted rumors that the other servants were out to get my husband, yet strange things began to happen. For instance, at my mother's death, there wasn't a word of sympathy, or even a card. We sat alone on viewing evening. Soon my husband was very formally called before the committee for alleged inhospitality. The wife of the assistant overseer claimed she had come to visit, and I wouldn't come to the door. She had never visited us in all those years. I was attending a PTA meeting at our son's school at the time and could have proven that I wasn't home. It was just pick and hurt, but we still paid little attention. We knew that such unkindness was in the nature of some of them, but never dreamed that these people with whom we had worked closely for years could be motivated to disfellowship us. By this time, our older son was 21 and married to a witness girl. The overseer still badgered him. Finally, at the request of our son, after the overseer had again publicly humiliated him, my husband tried to talk with him about this. My husband made it clear that if he could do nothing but destroy our children, he should let them alone. The overseer flared up and made accusations. Although my husband was in the right, he graciously went to the overseer's home and tried to patch up the differences, but he would not listen, and my husband was deprived of all position and privileges. Later I asked the congregation leaders about this, and the assistant overseer told me that he was trying to teach that Donald Bedwell some humility. That's an exact quote from the leader of the congregation. They finally got their way, and my husband was disfellowshipped for disloyalty to his fellow servants. Again, a phrase that was apparently the accusation, disloyalty to his fellow servants. When they sent for him, they did not even tell him that it was a disfellowshipping hearing. After I learned what kind of meeting it was, I asked if I could be a witness for him. The circuit servant only shoved me and was rude. At this time, I was very humble before the authority of the society and felt sure that they would follow the published rules. When one is disfellowshipped, he is viewed as dead before God and all Jehovah's Witnesses. He ceases to exist, and even his immediate family, if they are not under his roof and care, can have nothing to do with him. Several friends and I spoke with the circuit servant and told him of the lies and injustice of the hearing. 4 of us were called in and told that we could not question the authority of the overseer. I was told that if I felt that the hearing was not just, it was not only my right, but my duty to write to the society. I could hardly believe some of the things which were stated, and I said, "Do you mean that if the overseer tells me to do something unscriptural, I have to do it?" The spokesman of the committee, with the agreement of those with him, said emphatically, "Yes, if he tells you to do something wrong, your blood will be on his hands. If a church were corrupt, a person could move on to another of his choice. But in the Watchtower Society, the local congregation is all that there is, and one cannot even attend another. He must attend where he's assigned. As much as I wanted to be free of the harassment of these people, I was bound by their rules. I wrote a very humble letter asking the society to look into the matter of my husband's disfellowshipping. Then I was also disfellowshipped for attempting to discredit the servants in the Martinsburg congregation. The assistant overseer laughed at me because they had tricked me into following their advice. I had been so careful to follow the rules because I knew of their intentions to find fault with me, and now, in spite of my carefulness, they succeeded. I just wish there were space to go into the unbelievable ugliness and lying of this experience. The rules of the Watchtower Society and even of common decency were all broken. I wasn't allowed any witnesses, and my accusers were also the committee who were my judges. To them, an impartial committee. I was very shocked, not by being disfellowshipped, but by seeing men I had followed for years descend to such depths before my eyes. It was all so groundless and so full of coincidences that I believe with all my heart that God used this means to strike us down and make us see just as surely as he did the Apostle Paul in Acts 9. But all that happened was still not enough to make me leave the witnesses. For a year and a half I sat at every meeting, thinking of myself as a Christian martyr, but had no contact with the members because to them I had ceased to exist. I had also always felt sorry for disfellowshipped people, yet I was surprised to find that I felt almost contented for the first time in years. I sometimes wondered if this was the devil working on me, but I didn't really believe that. I think the Lord meant for me to sit there because I was beginning to see the organization for what it really was. I thought, could this be the great pearl of wisdom I had trusted with my life? I was sure of one thing, and that was that I didn't want to return. About 5 years ago, a terrible thing happened that ultimately drew me closer to Christ. Our older son, who by now had a little son of his own, was working with dynamite, and as he bent over it, it blew up in his face. He was in shock and refused treatment for nearly a day. He required over 150 stitches, but worst of all, he was blind. He should have been dead. Only a rib kept a stone from going into his heart. I was near hysteria, and I just could not stand the thought of his being blind and disfigured. Early on Easter morning, in the car in front of the hospital, I prayed as I never had prayed before. It seemed as though I could not take no for an answer. After a while, a feeling of peace and assurance came over me, such as I had never experienced. I again felt fellowship with Christ. Although my son was blind for 2 weeks, I knew he would be all right. I won't even attempt to explain it, but he was healed. I know only that the Lord did it and gave me assurance that he would. There was nothing the doctor could do but deaden the pain. My son not only has good eyesight now, but doesn't even need the glasses he wore before. Even his scars are small. 2 outstanding eye specialists have called him a miracle patient. 3 tiny stones had been blown entirely through his eyes, yet his sight is better than before. One doctor said that he had done nothing, that God had done it all. Other doctors were called in to see his eyes because the recovery was so unbelievable. Many times I've asked myself why, after the miraculous healing, my son didn't leave the organization entirely and accept Christ. Just a few months ago, it came to me that this had not been meant for him, but was to lead me back to Christ. I had promised God that if he would heal my son, I would do his will, as it was revealed to me. I don't know what I could have been thinking, because even without waiting for God's leading, I decided he must want me to apply for reinstatement in the Watchtower Society. I just felt sick over this decision, yet I did all I could to be reinstated. At the hearing, the new overseer, who seemed like a nice young man, said that I was a credit to the congregation. He praised me repeatedly. He said he could find no fault with me. Yet he turned his palms up and shrugged and said, "My hands are tied." He was the final authority on my case. It was just as though the Lord took direct action in several instances. My only explanation now for my not being reinstated is that I prayed, but since I didn't know about waiting on the Lord, I felt I myself must figure it out. I had prayed earnestly for deliverance from this confusion, and the Lord was doing it in spite of all I did to resist and grieve the Holy Spirit. My husband was reinstated, but couldn't stand it. He finally quit attending meetings and then resigned. I had been studying the Bible some now, but unfortunately it was the witness's biased New World Translation. Later, when I went to the hospital for a knee operation, I again saw Pastor Dell as he called on another patient. I felt that I just must talk with him, but then I thought how futile such a talk would be because of our different beliefs. I felt a sense of loss and depression when he left. I was conscious of a new confusion now. Where could I turn? The witnesses had made me critical and suspicious of churches, and some with which I had been familiar deserved my distrust. I felt as though I didn't belong any place. Surely God didn't intend for me to spend my life in a lonely spiritual vacuum. We'll take up the end of Evelyn's story next time. In the meantime, I've put in a link again to Vivian's witness, the first of 4 personal videos she did, the very first video she did some 4 years ago, plus the testimony playlist that we've created recently. See you soon.